Greetings. So today I'm going to go ahead and make a tier list based on every single Fallout game and how I think they should be ranked in terms of my personal opinion of the Fallout games. The reason I want to do this is because obviously being a Fallout channel, I wanted to more show my opinion on the Fallout games and how I think that they are rated and ranked so you guys kind of get an idea of what I think of the Fallout franchise. So we're going to go ahead and do this in order. It's very simple. We're going to go from basically when each game was released, and then I'm going to go down the list. So first off, we're going to go ahead and kick off with Fallout 1. And also I did want to mention that I am going to be showing a radar graph and kind of discussing them, just kind of going over how I feel about each game and putting it down and breaking it up into a few different sections such as story, gameplay, gunplay, player choice, as well as modding. So first off, we're going to kick off with Fallout 1. Fallout 1, I gave a 10 to the story because personally, I think Fallout 1 is the best of the Fallout games story-wise. It offers the most setting, the most narrative, as well as setting up the entire series in such a way that allowed for several masterpieces of games to be created. Fallout 1 was unique in its own right because it told the story of not just toxic radioactive mutants wanting to take over the wasteland, but it did it in such a way that it almost seemed benevolent. And what I mean by that is that it didn't make the Master just some comedically evil villain. It made him someone with a drive, a purpose, and a want to make the wasteland a better place. And from his perspective, he saw the mutants as something that would actually improve humanity and make humanity be able to move on from the devastation that is caused in the world. This combined with the overarching factor that the water chip is broken, which essentially leads to the discovery of the Master and basically the epic being created of the Vault Dweller's story. I think that everything within the Fallout 1 story is just a masterpiece. It really lays down the entire foundation for which the series was created. It builds a world that is so interesting and so enthralling to so many people. And whether you like Fallout 1 or not, if you enjoy the Fallout franchise, you owe Fallout 1 for the world that you enjoy and the world that you care about. Fallout 1 is a game that not only portrays dark and dreary sides of humanity, but also shows the amount of hope and the importance of things like comedy and the ability to laugh at things that would otherwise be incomprehensible to laugh at. The gameplay of Fallout 1 as well as the gunplay are two things that unfortunately do have a huge shortcoming when you look at them objectively. Personally, I have no problem with them, but for a lot of people it is the hurdle that makes them not want to play the older games, which I completely understand. But at the same time, you also gotta respect that this is the game that the franchise we all know and love was built off of, and this is the game that made it all possible. Going to player choice is very hard for this game because a lot of the other games I will be judging based on the fact that you can join several different factions in the game. Of course, in Fallout 1 you can join the Unity, but unfortunately it just leads to a 2-minute long cutscene, as well as basically just getting a game over and saying that you failed. Well, this is not the choice I really go for in Fallout 1 and even Fallout 2. The choice I am talking about is the ability to do different things within different communities, and what I mean by that is things like Junktown, the LA Boneyard, the slave pits, etc., etc. So you can see in all those communities you can have a sway in how they end up at the end of the game, such as saving Tandy and basically forming of the NCR by your actions. And at the same time, you can end up not doing that, and those towns get absolutely decimated, which would completely change the course of Fallout history. So when I say player choice for Fallout 1, I don't necessarily mean the amount of factions you can join or the amount of things you can necessarily do as the main character in terms of teams that you can side with. I mean that you can actually go to a community and you can make a lasting effect in the ending. And of course, the modding community for Fallout 1 is almost non-existent. Of course, there are some small mods, gameplay improvements, etc., but there's nothing huge and nothing that would essentially bring you back to the game to play through it one more time just because you had a certain mod. Maybe for some people, I definitely would, but for most players, I would say there's nothing incredibly damning that would have you re-downloading the game just to play through it again with that mod. And through all of its shortcomings, I do think that it is respectable and totally plausible to put Fallout 1 at an A tier. I think that it does a perfect job setting up the game and the narrative and the story, and created something that's lasting that Fallout fans are still enjoying to this day. So of course, next we have Fallout 2. Fallout 2 is kind of a difficult one for me to talk about, but I do think that it's fairly simple to get a grasp on how I feel about the game. So Fallout 2 story-wise, I decided to give a 9 because I feel like Fallout 2's story was a very much rehashing of Fallout 1. And hear me out before you start saying, "Fuck you, man, the Fallout 2 is the best game ever, what are you talking about?" Relax. I know what I sound like, but just let me ration it out real quick. So I do think it's excellent Fallout 2 decided to kind of change the narrative and spin it around, whereas at the end of Fallout 1 you're like, yeah, fuck those mutants, get rid of them, kill them, fuck them. And then at the beginning of Fallout 2 you realize, oh shit, I'm the mutant now, what the fuck, like who are these guys? Super anti-mutants, super anti, just anyone in the wasteland, they are against them, they want to kill them, get rid of them, etc, etc. But I feel like in Fallout 2, the Enclave is very similar to the Master in the respect that they want to do what's best for humanity in their own right, but at the same time, it's almost comedically evil, but at the same time, it does make sense because these are obviously an evil group of people who think that the Wasteland is genuinely mutated beyond repair. The reason I would say that they are comically evil is because that their reasoning is so back-assward. It makes no real sense that you go in and you talk to some of the scientists and their only realization for doing this is because they tested 1 or 2 people and their DNA showed like marginal or like fractional differences between the DNA, so they figured that was enough reason to kill everyone within the wasteland. And to me, that seems comedically stupid. And one of the endings in Fallout 2 is where you get one of the scientists to dump the FEV into the Enclave's own filtration systems, because you essentially walk up to him and say, well, what if your research is wrong? And then he's like, oh, damn, son, like, I better kill all my own people now. Well, kind of makes no sense. And in my opinion, while the Fallout 2 story is amazing, it's great, I feel like it's kind of a little bit of a rehashing of Fallout 1, but just flipping the situation around in a way to make the player see that, damn, wait, I'm the mutant now? What the fuck? It does it in such a way that I wasn't that big of a fan of, but the Enclave still, and to this day, remains probably my favorite faction within all of the Fallout franchise. But when you're talking about my favorite villain, that spot always goes to the Master. Frank Horrigan was great. He's iconic. He is one of the most amazing characters in Fallout, but he will never beat the Master in terms of cunning, how cool he was, how scary he was, but also having the cool morals behind him that are obviously conflicting with what would be good and what's bad. So gameplay, gunplay, you'll see that I did give them a slightly bit higher than Fallout 1. The reason for that being is that obviously in Fallout 2, the system's almost exactly the same, but it's much more refined. You can play Fallout 2, and it does feel much more easy to get into, especially for newer people. The Temple of Trials, I think, can be pretty hard for some people, but as long as you pay attention and are willing to spend more than like 25 minutes trying it, you will most likely be able to figure it out and get through it. But once you get into the actual meat and potatoes of the game, it does feel much better, much more smooth. I like the map system much more in Fallout 2 because you actually have to find things, and it's not just, oh, you're within 3 spaces of it, you automatically know where this town is, etc, etc. In Fallout 2, finding a town is actually somewhat hard, and you can't just wander around in a direction and then just find all these towns and basically go to them. You kind of almost have to be right on top of that location to actually find it, which I do think is a lot better. The gunplay, again, it's hard to judge because this is a game where gunplay really isn't a factor. It's more of just gameplay, so you can kind of mix the two, but I think the gunplay is a little bit better in this in terms of how special stats affect your weaponry and their damage, as well as just the broad range of how many weapons there are. In Fallout 1, it does feel like there's a lot of weapons, but many of them feel very samey. But in Fallout 2, every single weapon feels good, feels different, and there's such a wide range of weapons in the game that it just makes it super fun and super different to try different weapons, playstyles, etc, etc. And for player choice, it is about the exact same as Fallout 1, where all your choices have lasting impacts on the wasteland, and I super like how exactly how much you can have an influence And nothing really changed in that regard. They're kind of the same for the both games, but I think Fallout 2 did have a lot more choices that you could make and a lot more evil things that you can do, which I definitely appreciate because it gives more longevity to the game, as well as what you can do in different playthroughs and things of that nature. Of course, you can't join the Enclave, which I think is kind of sad. I feel like it would have been kind of cool if there was a path where you could end up joining the Enclave, but it does make sense. They would have just seen your character as a mutant, etc., etc. But I still think it would have been cool to have at least what they did with Unity, where you can join the Enclave and then you get like a cool little ending slide that just shows your character with them. I don't know, it probably would have been stupid, but that's just my thought on that issue anyway. And of course, modding does get a little bit more of a bump here because there are more mods for this game. There is actually a somewhat sizable modding community. It's nothing compared to Fallout 3, New Vegas, or 4, but at the same time, it is much larger than the Fallout 1 modding community, so it did get a bit of a bump there. I know a lot of Fallout fans will screech in my ear for saying this, but I believe thoroughly that Fallout 2 is definitely on the same tier as Fallout 1. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and stick that at an A tier as well. So next, we're going to go with the all-time famous Fallout Tactics. So Fallout Tactics, let's go ahead and break down the story. I did not care for Fallout Tactics story that much. I felt that a lot of the cutscenes were very generic, like, get ready trooper, we're going out for the military, like that kind of thing. Like, it felt like you were opening up to like an early 2000s Tom Clancy game. I didn't really care for it, but it did have a cool feeling, a cool vibe. I think the story is a solid like C tier. But at the same time, I felt like that it's kind of a product of its time. The game is very early 2000s, and it definitely shows with the story. The story with the calculator was cool. It had its moments, but I think that overall, it was just mediocre. It felt Fallout, but at the same time, it didn't. And I personally just can't really recommend the game, as the dated feel of the game does match Fallout 1 and 2. But the story doesn't have nearly the amount of effort and quality put into it, because you can play Fallout 1 and 2 for the story flat out. And I would say if you said you played those games purely for the story, did not care about the gameplay at all, excellent. Good on you, man. There are very few people who can even do that nowadays, which I totally respect those that actually go back and play the old games. If you don't, that's your own thing. But this game, I could never recommend for someone to go back and play because it can be a slog. I think the average playtime to get through this is almost like 20 hours or something like that, and most of that 20 hours is boring, and for some people I've heard it's even taken like 40 to 60. My voice just cracked there. It's taken like 40 to 60, and I personally I can't recommend the story. I can't recommend going back to it. If you have to, I would say just watch a YouTube video of the story, and you'll kind of get the idea. The problem is it also breaches into the non-canon area where it's kind of left up in the air if they're even canon or not. There's mention of them in the newer games, but that's about it. They're just terminal logs. It's nothing really solid. The gameplay and the gunplay, however, did see marked improvements from the other games. I think it's about same tier as Fallout 2, where it was good. It was actually probably better than Fallout 2, but the problem is the game has no real reason for you to play it. So if there's no good story, there's no good anything behind it, it doesn't really matter if there's marked gameplay improvements. And I gotta say, for this, it's a solid 6 almost across the board for each one of these. Player choice is like a 3, I would say. It's just not. It felt Fallout, but it also didn't. I just can't recommend this game to anyone. If you, like I said, just watch some videos online, you'll get the gist of the game. However, this is the first game that does get a lot of modding support for the online community. I never really played it because I was born in, the late 90s, and by this point I wasn't really playing computer games. And it did get a lot of modding support. That's one thing that this game was actually kind of known for, the multiplayer modding support that kind of added stuff to it. And I thought that was really cool, so it did actually get a bump from me for the modding community. Unfortunately, a lot of the mods now, I believe, aren't really usable unless you're setting up your own LAN party game with your friends. But even then, still cool, definitely does get a bit of an improvement, so I actually gave it a bit of a boost for the modding support. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this bad boy at a C tier. I think pretty much everyone here can agree that the game of Fallout Tactics is literally just average, medium across the board. So next, Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. Do I even need to say anything? All right, I'm going to break this down. Story, garbage. Terrible. I can't even recommend watching a YouTube video of this game. It's god-awful. It's trash. The only redeeming factors of this game is that its gameplay and gunplay is actually phenomenal. It's based off the same system that the old Baldur's Gate games were based off of, and just the gameplay and gunplay and that was actually phenomenal. At the same time, there's no substance. You're playing a blank slate here. It's literally, actually, it's probably worse than a blank slate, if I'm being completely honest. A game where you were just shooting fucking dots would be better than playing this piece of shit. And, I mean, it shows. Just go play the old fucking Baldur's Gate games, because those are actually good, and this game's just a rotten piece of dog shit. This game has no modding support, no surprise, because it's shit. And player choice, virtually zero. I don't think there's choices you can even make in the game other than like dialogue choices that do jack shit. So, yeah, piece of shit. Moving on, shit tier. So next we're going to go ahead and move on to Fallout 3. Let's go to brighter pastures here, and we're going to actually get into the newer Fallout games, which I hope most of you have played. Fallout 3, Fallout 3, Fallout 3. Where to begin with this game? I love it and I hate it. So we're going to go ahead and break down the story real quick. So the story for me was a solid 8. I loved it when it came out, but the problem is now I've come to realize that it's a very generic Hollywood story that unfortunately is very Deus Ex Machina, if that's the right word or term to use for it. You see, I am personally a non-fan of how much Brotherhood is basically presented in the Fallout 3 games or the Fallout Bethesda games, and I feel like a lot of what they accomplish is a Deus Ex Machina from the main protagonists. Of course, you have people like Maxon in Fallout 4, which are, don't get me wrong, very well written characters, and it makes me happy to see the Brotherhood doing stuff on their own, but it is a product of a Deus Ex Machina from the character, which makes almost zero sense. And of course, in the Fallout 1 and 2, they do that, but to the scale that they do it in Fallout 3 and 4, I personally feel like it was almost too much. And it's just, to me, somewhat ridiculous, but we're going to go ahead and break this down exactly what I think. So the tale of James, as well as the Lone Wanderer, I think starts off very strong. Liam Neeson plays a great character, and I think he is obviously one of the strongest characters within Fallout 3 as a whole, besides Colonel Autumn. And James and his ideas are really cool. The only thing I don't like is how much of a generic hero James is, but at the same time, he's a doctor, and what he does make sense, and every choice he makes does have gravity as well as good feelings. And they do build a lot of character around James, which feels great. It feels natural and feels good. And I definitely really like James and his character, as well as Colonel Autumn. It's just that I felt like the generic son searching for his father was somewhat cliche, but at the same time, it did what it needed to do, and I think it does earn a solid 8 out of 10 if I had to rate it, which I think personally is no small tier. But others might hear, 8 out of 10, what the fuck, that's terrible. Like, no, 8 out of 10 is good. I love Fallout 3, I love Fallout 3's story, it's just, I think that it's somewhat cliche. And also the Deus Ex Machinas that take place. Unfortunately, it's a product of every Fallout game, but I just hate how Fallout 3 forces you to be a Deus Ex Machina for the Brotherhood of Steel and the Brotherhood of Steel alone. Of course, you get your choices and things like that, where you can poison the FEV, water supply, everything like that. But at the same time, it still just railroads you into siding with the Brotherhood of Steel, and the game makes you feel like shit if you do anything other than side with the Brotherhood of Steel, which I did not like at all, and I think really takes away from the story of the game. And I really didn't appreciate how they make the Enclave, again, cartoonishly evil, but they actually redeem it by making a character like Colonel Autumn who genuinely wants to help people and is less of a cartoonishly evil villain and actually a person, but then just makes it so that you can't side with him at all and he has to be the bad guy. I just don't get that, and it makes no sense to me. And then, of course, the Brotherhood gets fucking giant death robot that just plows through the Enclave. And if you know the story of Fallout 2, the Enclave literally almost destroyed the Brotherhood of Steel. And here, again, you have the Enclave more powerful, more people, and have been in the Capital Wasteland longer than they have. But at the same time, the Brotherhood, even without the Lone Wanderers, are almost beating their ass. Which to me makes no real sense, but of course, the Bethesda Fallout people just, they love to ramshackle the Brotherhood of Steel into your face. It's just something I don't like, but I'm sure other people do. Next, we're going to go ahead and talk about gameplay and gunplay. I think this is about the same tier as Fallout 1 and 2, where it's good, it's serviceable, but it does feel dated. This game was made on the Gamebryo engine, which felt dated back in 2006 with Oblivion. And of course, I'm not saying that Oblivion felt dated on release, but you can definitely tell that it was, it's getting old. The Gamebryo engine, I think, was used for, God, people are gonna fucking kill me for not knowing, Morrowind. It was used for Morrowind, and then it was just updated to Oblivion, and then used on Fallout 3. And by this time, you can already tell that this was starting to feel a little old, and they just added guns to this mix. And the only thing I will say that made the game phenomenal in terms of its gameplay was the addition of VATS. VATS was something I had never really experienced in a game until Fallout 3. Of course, you had things like max paint bullet time, etc., etc., but there was nothing like VATS. VATS was so cool, that cinematic feel, like watching the bullet hit your target and then just watching them explode into like a bloody red paste. Something about that was just so cool, it's so interesting, so intriguing. So I do think it is pretty good. I mean, you can go back and play the games now. They're not nearly as hard to get into as the old Fallout games, but I do think they are pretty average in terms of how they were presented. And at the time, I don't think the games, even in 2008, offered anything really groundbreaking or anything we had never seen before besides for the VAT system. Next, we are going to talk about the player choice of Fallout 3. The player choice, again, like Fallout 1 and 2, it's a lot of different choices in what you can do with the cities and towns around. But the problem is, they're so few and far in between. It feels like the only real towns in Fallout 3 are Rivet City and Megaton, and then there are small settlements around, but nothing really matters what you do to those small ones. Like the Republic of Dave, well, don't get me wrong, is hilarious. It's great, it's a very realistic wasteland faction, and I love it, but the problem is, if you go massacre everyone there, like nothing happens. It's just, oh, cool, you massacred the Republic of Dave, or you killed the Paradise Falls slavers. My biggest problem is that you go and do stuff for these communities, and then at the end, you either get slide A or slide B for both one. It's like, the Lone Wanderer did not give in to the vices of the wasteland. Or, the Lone Wanderer gave in to the vices of the wasteland, unlike his heroic father, and was a piece of shit. And it's just like, well, all these other Fallout games gave you such a huge, in-depth ending and told you exactly what happened within these communities that you decided to help, and gave you such a feeling of closure of what happened, good or bad, and Fallout 3 didn't do any of that. The only thing it gives you any kind of closure on was the Project Purity event. And what's stupid to me is, like, say you bring Fox and you have Fox turn on the thing, and you would think, oh yeah, that makes sense. You would have the mutant go do it because, you're gonna die, or he can just go, wash the as Harold says, wash the radiation off his bag like a water on a duck's bag, or whatever the fuck it was. And then the ending slide ridicules you. He's like, unlike the hero of your dad, you were a piece of shit and decided to live. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? I just did the situation that made sense. Like, why am I a dick? I don't know. I just didn't like that. That was something that always, I didn't really care for. And I don't like how you had to pay for a DLC just to continue after the game. I mean, I guess I kind of get it. But at the same time, it's like, oh yeah, here's a DLC that lets you do something that you should have been able to do in the game for free. And part of me feels like Broken Steel shouldn't have even been a DLC. I feel like a lot of the time it should have been something included with the game. It feels like almost fucking like dislocked content, but it is what it is, I guess. So it's just something that always rubbed wrong with me, and just that mixed with no player choice, I think it's easily like D tier in that section. But where Fallout 3 gets the biggest buff in my decision of where it lies on the tier list is the modding community. The modding community for this game is phenomenal. It can change the game to something totally different, make it renewed, revamped, as well as just make the game a totally different thing and such a better experience. And the ease of access of installing these mods is something that also made me consider where I put it on my tier list. And so for that, I'm going to go ahead and put Fallout 3 at a B tier. And you may say, well, if you think that Fallout 2 and Fallout 1 are such great games, why would you put Fallout 3 at that same tier? That doesn't make sense. You should probably put that at a C or a D. And I would somewhat agree with you, but I do respect the fact that without Fallout 3, we wouldn't have gotten the game that I'm sure all of you are waiting for. And I think that respect does kind of play into where this game lies. And the reason I say that is because, if this game was the progenitor, this game is the foundation on which everyone's favorite Fallout was built on. So that's why I think it's a B tier. It's not a bad Fallout game. It is a great Fallout fan game. So there was a video a long time ago that said this, but Fallout 3 is the best Fallout fan game to ever exist. And the reason I say that is because it was made by Fallout fans, and there were some of the original people on the development team, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I feel like Fallout 3 was a beta for Fallout New Vegas. And, I think Fallout 3 was a great game. It got me into the franchise, I'm sure like many of you. And that's why I think it's very deserving of a B tier. I mean, it's a great game, great franchise, great. The world that it built was great. I didn't like how, after 250 years, they couldn't think of any new factions besides the Brotherhood and Enclave. That is kind of a pet peeve. But at the same time, as a package, Fallout 3 with all of its DLC is a solid B tier. Without the DLC, I think I would probably put it at a C or a D. But every DLC besides Broken Steel was a banger for Fallout 3. Point Lookout, banger. The Pit, banger. Mothership Zeta, banger. Those were all great. They were all cool, fun, interactive, wacky. Solid B tier of a game. So, this is the one you've all been waiting for, I'm sure. And I'm just going to spoil the surprise right now. S tier. Fallout New Vegas. So we're putting this at an S. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to break it down why. So, not to be generic, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you exactly why I think this way and why I think that honestly this game objectively even is an S tier of a Fallout game. So, reason number one, story. Let's go and start with that. I'm not even going to give this a 10 for a story. I think it's a solid 9. I think there's things that they could have done better and they could have added to it. And of course, I know the famous deadline and everything like that. But at the same time, with the deadline, I still blame that on Bethesda. I don't blame it on the people who made the game, but I feel like they could have done more to make it better. And that's why I still think that Fallout 1 even had a better story than Fallout New Vegas, because some of the villains in Fallout New Vegas don't really make that much sense, or their logic behind why they do things doesn't make that sense. Like things such as war is peace. It's like the sayings from fucking 1984 where it makes no sense, but it's just there to baffle people. So let's go ahead and break this down. So Fallout New Vegas. The story is amazing. It involves so many factions, so many moving parts, so many things you can do, and this is where player choice is obviously going to be a fucking 10. And so with the story of New Vegas, the story, the backdrop, however you call it, I think the laziest part was the courier. And I think just saying he was a courier kind of made no sense. And then they threw in this little side story where all these couriers are like these legendary people, which made no sense. It's just like, oh yeah, Courier 6 was like this legendary like Legion guy who was like this insane fighter. And then here you are just like the fucking mailman dressed like Woody from Toy Story in the beginning. Like in the opening cutscene, you see his arms and he has like a fucking cowboy shirt on. And it to me just doesn't make that much sense where these couriers, like fucking mailmen, are just these legendary people that are just like people know are just able to shift the balance of anything. And it's like, you're the courier. It's like, what? I just won the Battle of Hoover Dam, and the only thing you recognize me as is the fucking mailman. It's like you're not the hero. Like, you're not a hero. You're the fucking courier. It's like how did they even know I was a courier? It's like you don't even tell these people that you're a courier. Like there's like 2 dialogue in the game where you say that you're a courier other than just like the generic name you typed in. And all these people will just address you as the courier. It's like, how the fuck did you even know I was a courier? That just never made sense to me. But otherwise, the story was great. Everything about it was cool. I just think the main character was kind of written a little lazy, and the randomness of couriers being these legendary, like, heroic wastelanders kind of was a little weird to me. But regardless, the story of New Vegas, of the New California Republic, of Caesar's Legion, of House, of all these different people and how they tie together and how all these moving parts work as one to make a masterpiece of a game is just crazy. It genuinely shocks me to this day to see a game like this, and I've never since 2010 have played a game even close to having a story as compelling as well as controllable by the player as this one. So I gotta give hats off. It is a solid 9. If the courier or whoever was the main protagonist had more of a reason to be as legendary as they are, it would have made a little bit more sense. The Vault Dweller, of course, is the exact same way, but the Vault Dweller could be... The idea of the Vault Dweller is that they could be anyone, and the courier kind of makes no sense because it's just like, yeah, I guess anyone could be a courier, but it's like, why a courier? Like, I don't know. To me, it's just kind of weird, but I guess it makes sense because you're kind of a wanderer and you're supposed to kind of know the area. So, of course, of any of those people, a courier would have made a lot more sense than really any other profession. But I mean, my biggest problem with courier is it could be interlaced with mercenary, with survivalist, with all these other random titles. To me, it just felt lazy, but I'm sure a lot of people like it, so, you know, I'm not going to go that too in depth. Gameplay, about the same as Fallout 3. For me, I feel like it just felt so the same. It felt the exact same as Fallout 3, the Gamebryo engine itself. This is no fault of Obsidian. It's just that the Gamebryo engine at this point was so old, it had run its course, and it just felt old. Though that doesn't mean that the game felt bad. The game felt amazing to play. It felt way more polished and refined than Fallout 3 did. But to me, it's about the same. Those polish and refinements didn't really hit that hard, and it still felt like almost the exact same game. And I mean that gameplay-wise, not story or anything like that. Obviously, story setting, everything in that long line of lists is totally different. So, player choice. Not much needs to be said about this. You know, if you've played Fallout New Vegas, the amount of choices you have is insane. This is why so many people love this game to death. No 2 playthroughs will be the exact same, and that is something that feels so refreshing about this game. Of course, you can say that about Fallout 3, oh, I didn't kill this NPC on this playthrough, but I did it on this, but I was evil on... No. No 2 ending slideshows will be exactly alike. And that is what's like nuts to me, is that there are so many combinations of endings, no filler either. It's all worthwhile information, and it tells you about the tale of what your character did and exactly what effects you had on the wasteland during your time playing through that character. And to me, it is just so phenomenal how it was done, and within such a short amount of time too. That's just so insane. Like, I can't believe that to this day I haven't played a game with this much choice, and it actually, like, irks me that, like, there's never been a game since that have offered this level of choice to the player in such a way that was so meaningful. Like, it made your character actually feel like a living legend within the wasteland, and that's something no game has really ever accomplished or made me feel in this exact same way. So that is why I think it is an S tier. And of course, modding. You can't talk about New Vegas without talking about modding. The mod support for this game is phenomenal. It is the highest of all games besides one, and I will explain that in a moment. So Fallout New Vegas's modding is just phenomenal. There's so many mods, so many weapons, so many things you can add to the game that make it feel better, brand new, and great. But the thing that stops it from being a 10 rather than a 9 is the accessibility of modding. And what I mean by that is that modding the game to be stable while also running all these other side mods can be so damn difficult. for some people. For me, I learned how to do it. I watched many videos, I spent a few hours, and I got it working. I got all the mods I wanted to try, and it was a very good experience. But I feel like for the average person, modding the game can be such a pain in the ass, and I feel like that's the one thing that draws the modding from a 10 to a 9. Some other people may disagree, and of course you may be savants when it comes to modding New Vegas and things like that, but I personally feel like it was such a pain in the ass and took so long to actually get working and being functional without crashing that it definitely did take it down a peg. So popping that bad boy on the tier list, S tier. So next, of course, we are going to be working on Fallout 4, and so Fallout 4 for me, story, awful. There's no redeeming qualities about this game's story. It was just literally reverse Fallout 3 story. It wasn't creative. The Institute wasn't a good enemy. I'm just gonna break it down now and just tell you exactly why. I felt like the Institute, their reasoning for doing things was very stupid. The way it was presented was stupid. Their armor, everything about the Institute just looks so dumb to me. It didn't even look like a Fallout faction. It just felt like everything about it was just so rushed, and they wanted an evil boogeyman, and then you just get to it, and it's just this wet fart of a faction. And no one in the Institute was memorable. It's like the only character about the Institute that's even remotely memorable is your son, is Sean. And even then, it's not that great. It's just like the talk between the lone survivor or sole survivor and Sean is definitely really good. It was definitely emotional. That it built up, and I do respect the story for that matter. I mean, the talk with Sean was interesting no matter what faction you chose, but the problem is no matter what faction you chose, the talk was almost the exact same unless you decided to join the Institute. And I do appreciate that, you could join the Institute and there were a lot of factions to join, but the problem is every single faction you joined led to the exact same thing. It was like the ending of Mass Effect 3, where the only difference between each faction you chose was the color of the explosion at the end. And, you get a few special lines of dialogue, and then the ending for each one is the exact same. It's like, oh, as the radiation washed over me, I realized the wasteland has changed me as a person. Maybe for the better or the worst. And it's just like, really? That's it? Like it's such a wet fart of a story and an ending. It just makes you feel like you wasted 40 fucking hours on this game. Pisses me off to this day, man. I know I might get hate from this. I know a lot of people love Fallout 4. I fucking hated Fallout 4. Fallout 4 was not good. As a game, I think it was phenomenal. The gameplay, the gunplay was great, but as I said for Brotherhood of Steel, it just feels like there's no substance to the game. And while the world and exploration of Fallout 4 was very fun, I enjoyed it thoroughly. I mean, I put hundreds of hours into the game, so obviously, I got my money's worth for sure. But Fallout 4 as a game had no substance, and I feel like Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas' guns looked amazing, the world looked amazing, and it all felt very Fallout. The problem with Fallout 4 is I feel like everything, like Fallout 3 in New Vegas' world is like Legos, and then fucking Fallout 4 is like Mega Blocks. Like, it just feels like it's so weird, glossy, and like it just feels like it was made in like Forge Editor and Halo, and I just don't like it. I feel like everything feels so same, so cookie cutter, and they go with this weird minimalistic future style, which definitely doesn't feel like what Fallout was. Fallout was about the over extravagance of the modern world, and I just didn't really like it. Like the skylines, the skyscrapers going into the actual ruins of Boston and everything like that, it just didn't feel good. I felt like it didn't feel Fallout. It just felt like a generic post-apocalyptic game with a somewhat Fallout feeling. I feel like they ruined a lot of the guns, like the laser rifle and stuff. Don't get me wrong, I think those felt okay, but I still think that the Fallout 3 laser rifles are superior. The plasma rifle from Fallout 3 fit the style and feeling of even the old Fallout games, and I loved it. But then all these new guns got added and replaced the old ones, and they just look stupid. They just look like these really bad 1950s like replicas of what they thought plasma guns would look like. Whereas like in Fallout 1, 2, 3 in New Vegas, they were like these over extravagant, really cool looking guns. One thing that I always hated was how they changed the Gauss rifle. The Gauss rifle in Fallout 3 in New Vegas looked amazing in my opinion. And then in Fallout 4, it's just this weird fucking like stick of a gun that shoots electricity bullets. And I personally feel like it like ruined the vibe of the games, and I didn't like it whatsoever. I think a lot of the gun design and everything like that was really poorly done, and just overall I feel like it didn't feel Fallout other than the fact that there was power armor and there was vault suits. Everything else just felt not Fallout in my opinion. Though I will admit, I think one thing Fallout 4 excelled with was the power armor. I think the power armor was extremely realistic and cool looking. I think that is the biggest improvement on every Fallout game Bethesda has made, is the new power armor system. While I don't like the fusion core aspect where like Fallout power armor is like a limited thing, I do understand why they had to add it for balance, but personally I just didn't really care about the fusion cores. But I do think the way that power armor functioned was incredibly cool. I think that was a huge improvement overall to gameplay and to how power armor worked, and it made it more realistic lore-wise, so I do appreciate that, and I think they did a good job with a lot of the designs. However, I think it led to a lot of very stupid things, such as T65 and T60, which are just like these supposedly superior variants that existed way back when. And I just didn't like that. To me, it was pretty stupid, but whatever. But the one 10 out of 10 thing this game will have for me, modding. Modding for this game, there's a lot of very good mods, a lot of really cool mods that fix the game, like the dialogue wheel, which was absolutely terrible. A lot of the time, it would not say what it wanted you to say. It would say like sarcastic, and that's it. It would just be like, do you want to do yes, no, sarcastic, yes, but no. And then you would do sarcastic and you'd be like, fuck you, you fucking absolute stupid fucking idiot. What are you doing here? Fuck you. And he'd like go ballistic on him. You're like, how is that sarcastic? And it just made like no sense. Like you would have these things would be like angry. You'd be like, okay, angry. And then he'd be like, why are you not helping the Institute? And you're just like, how is that angry? And then you like hit the sarcastic and he's like going fucking bananas on someone. To me, it made no sense, but there are mods that fix that. And the reason that this game gets the 10 over New Vegas when it comes to modding, the mod community for this game is insane. There's a lot of mods that are being built up and a lot of mods that look phenomenal. And I will say that again, phenomenal. Fallout 4 New Vegas, the Project London one, Fallout Miami, I think it was called Fallout London, I honestly fucking forgot, but there's a lot of phenomenal mods for this game, and they are so easy to install. That's one thing I love, is that you can install like all the mods in the world and the game will still run fairly stable, and I love that about Fallout 4. You don't have to spend hours going for stability mods and doing random shit to get every mod to work without the game crashing, and that is why I think this game gets a big plus over New Vegas when it comes to modding. This is a fat 10 out of 10 when it comes to modding in this game. And I think the modding aspect of Fallout 4 is what earns it a solid B tier on my list. You might say, oh, well, you just spent, however many minutes shit talking the game. How are you going to give it a B? Well, here's one simple reason why I will give it this B, is because the modding support on this game is absolutely amazing. I would say it's even better than New Vegas, and the stability, phenomenal. Great. I fucking love it. And, if you were to rate this game vanilla, no DLC, it would be a D, for sure. With DLC, maybe like a D+, but with the mods, it is an amazing game. And unfortunately, I do have to add mods as like a huge thing when I make these tier lists because I'm a PC player. I use these mods all the time. If I were to do just like a console tier list, vanilla of each game, it'd probably just be New Vegas, A, Fallout 1. It would just, the only differences really would be that Fallout New Vegas would be at an A tier, Fallout 3 would be at a B tier, and this game would probably be at like a D+. But I'm gonna go off PC, and mods are gonna be included, so I am gonna go ahead and put this bad boy at a B. And finally, we're gonna talk about the last two. I'm gonna kind of lump these in together because it is getting pretty damn long right now. Fallout 76, Fallout Shelter. I know that's not technically in order. Shelter is a piece of shit cash grab game. I'm I'm sorry if you like that game. I don't think you're a bad person for liking it, but I personally just don't like it. It's a cash grab. It's not Fallout. It's Fallout themed, and all it is a reskin of some other garbage mobile games. And I'm sorry for the mobile gamers out there, but no. It's bad. It's just a Fallout skin mobile game, cash grab. That's really all it is. And finally, Fallout 76. So I know I've talked a lot of shit on Fallout 76 in the past, and I'll be honest, a lot of that was before even going through it and playing it, for more than a few hours. And I will say that Fallout 76 has grown on me. I still do not like the designs in the Atom Shop, even a 10 billionth of a percent. They're still awful, and they're still one of the many reasons why I dislike the game and have a hard time playing it for any prolonged period of time. And yet, the game still surprises me. I think the Steel Rain DLC and the Steel Rain add-ons have all been actually fantastic. I think they've been a very welcomed, thing. Most Fallout fans, will sit there and say, well, they retcon this, did this and that. I'm just looking at the perspective of an MMO. Like, I'm not going to get mad about Star Wars lore because fucking Old Republic MMO added some shit in. I just see it as what it is. It's an MMO. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to keep people coming back and playing it and buying the fucking atoms for DLCs and not DLCs, but cosmetics and stuff like that. So I understand it, and I'm not going to go too hard on it and sit here and ramble on, but I do think that Fallout 76 is a solid C tier of a game. It does what it wants to do. It is multiplayer Fallout. It has its moments. It has its fun. I think Steel Rain was actually done really well, and it didn't Deus Ex Machina the Brotherhood of Steel. I mean, they started off and they're pretty weak. They had their failures, and the player wasn't, just like the superhuman that comes in and makes them just like a big powerhouse. Even at the end of the Steel Rain DLC and like Steel Dawn, they're not this huge powerful group. They're still building up, and I can appreciate that, and I do like that. So I do think it is a solid C tier of a game. But as a Fallout game, I don't know. It's a very hard one for me to judge because I just want to hate it, but at the same time I gotta look at it from somewhat of an objective point, and I do see the game and it does have some value, but there are things about the game that I just cannot for the life of me ever like or see myself enjoying. Anyway, this video is starting to get way too long for my own good, so I appreciate you guys. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like, comment, sub, all that good shit. And, I do want to start posting a little bit more regularly rather than, monthly or bi-monthly. So I hope you'll see a little bit more videos coming from me in the near future. If you like the stuff, leave that like, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really helps and makes me see that people are interested in this stuff. And for all of you guys who are checking out that Gen Z Fallout video, I really do appreciate it. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I see how much, stuff and traction that's getting, and, how much people are watching it, enjoying it, reacting with it, talking about it with them. I know it's like literally just like the most minuscule shit on the planet. It's like I am below Z tier when it comes to YouTubers, but just seeing even, 5 people being interested in my video is super heartwarming, and I really appreciate it. So, if you had liked this video at all, let me know, react, even if it's a fucking dislike. I like seeing that, that reaction. So anyway, guys, have a good one. Peace.